The Utah desert was cruel at night. The moon hung like a scythe above the sandstone cliffs of Monument Valley, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for Eleanor Winters as she ran. Each breath came as a ragged gasp, burning her lungs like fire. Her swollen belly made every step a battle against her own body. July 1885. The night air still held the day's heat, pressing against her skin like an unwelcome hand. Eleanor's bare feet split open on sharp rocks, leaving a trail of blood that disappeared into the dry earth. Her dress, once white, now hung in tatters around her frame, stained with dirt, and darker marks she tried not to think about. Behind her, the distant sound of hooves broke the night's silence. The rhythmic tolling of a church bell echoed through the valley, growing louder with each passing minute. They were coming for her, for the child. Eleanor clutched at her stomach, feeling the raised scar tissue beneath her fingers. The mark they had carved into her skin, a cross within a sun, pulsed with each heartbeat. 6 months pregnant, and every day the weight grew heavier, a constant reminder of what had been done to her. When her legs finally gave out, Eleanor collapsed near a weathered fence post. Her vision swam with exhaustion, the stars above blurring into streaks of light. This was as far as she could go. Her fingers dug into the dry earth as she tried to push herself up, but her strength had abandoned her. "Please," she whispered to the empty night, "don't let them find the child." The sound of approaching footsteps made her heart seize with terror. This was it. They had found her. She curled around her belly, trying to shield the life within, waiting for rough hands to drag her back to that place. But the voice that came was not what she expected. "Good Lord, miss, what happened to you?" Eleanor forced her eyes open. A man stood over her, silhouetted against the night sky. In one hand, he held a lantern that cast golden light across his weathered face. In the other, a leather-bound Bible, his thumb marking a page as if he'd been interrupted in his reading. "Don't. Please, don't." Eleanor tried to crawl away, but her body refused to obey. The man knelt beside her, setting the lantern on the ground. The light revealed a face lined with years gray, streaking through his dark beard. His eyes, blue as a summer sky, showed no malice, only concern. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, his voice low and steady. "My name is Mason Reed. This is my land you're on." Eleanor's gaze darted past him, searching for others, for the men with torches who had been following her. "Are you alone?" Mason asked, following her gaze. "They're coming." Eleanor managed her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, help me." Mason didn't ask who they were. Instead, he carefully slipped one arm beneath her shoulders, the other under her knees. "I've got you. My cabin's not far." Eleanor wanted to resist, to question his intentions, but consciousness was slipping away. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was the North Star shining bright overhead as Mason carried her toward a distant cabin. Mason Reed had lived 58 years with more ghosts than friends. The war had taken most of his companions, and time had claimed the rest. He hadn't expected to find a pregnant woman collapsed by his fence on a Tuesday night, especially not one with a symbol carved into her flesh. He laid her gently on his bed, the only one in the small cabin. The girl couldn't be more than 18, with auburn hair and a face that, despite its current pallor, showed a delicate beauty. But it was the mark on her belly that made his stomach turn. A cross inside a sun, the symbol of the Society of Divine Light. Mason had seen it before, during the war, and after, when he'd been part of a special unit investigating cults that preyed on the chaos of post-war America. He'd thought those days were behind him when he settled in this remote corner of Utah territory. Apparently, he was wrong. He cleaned her wounds with water from the basin, careful not to disturb the sleeping girl. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her skin hot with fever. Around her neck hung a silver chain with a pendant, the same symbol that had been carved into her flesh. Mason's fingers trembled as he removed the necklace, studying it in the lamplight. The society had grown since he'd last encountered them, expanded their reach. That wasn't good news for anyone. He placed the pendant in a drawer and returned to the girl's side. Whatever had happened to her, she was safe now, at least for tonight. Mason settled into the chair beside the bed, his Bible open on his lap. It fell open naturally to Psalms, the pages worn from countless readings. A faded photograph served as his bookmark, a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile holding a small child. He touched the image with weathered fingers before returning to his vigil. Outside, the desert night grew quiet again. Too quiet. Mason listened for the hoofbeats the girl had feared, but heard nothing. That didn't mean they weren't coming. He reached for the rifle leaning against the wall, laid it across his knees, and continued his watch. Eleanor dreamed of rain. In her dream, water fell from the sky in sheets, turning the parched earth to mud, washing away the blood and pain. She stood in the downpour, face upturned, letting the water cleanse her. But then the rain turned warm and thick, and when she looked at her hands, they were covered in red. She woke with a strangled cry, disoriented in the unfamiliar darkness. "Easy now," came a voice from nearby. "You're safe." Memory flooded back the escape, the running, the stranger who had found her. Eleanor tried to sit up, but pain lanced through her abdomen, forcing her back down. "Don't try to move just yet," the man said. "You've been through quite an ordeal." Morning light filtered through curtained windows, illuminating the small cabin. It was spare, but clean, a table with 2 chairs, a stone fireplace, shelves lined with books, and the bed where she lay. The man from the night before, Mason, sat in a chair nearby, watching her with careful eyes. Eleanor's hand moved instinctively to her stomach. The child was still there, still moving. Relief washed through her. "The baby seems fine," Mason said, noting her concern. "But you need rest." Eleanor's gaze darted to the door, then the windows. "How long have I been here?" "Just the night. It's Wednesday morning now." Her heart raced. "I need to go. They'll be looking—" "Who's looking for you?" Mason asked, leaning forward. "Who did that to you?" He gestured toward her belly, where the carved symbol was hidden beneath a clean bandage. Eleanor fell silent, years of forced secrecy keeping the words locked inside. Mason sighed, then stood, moving to the table where a pot of coffee steamed. "You don't have to tell me, but you're in no condition to go anywhere." He poured a cup and brought it to her. "I won't make you stay against your will, but at least give yourself a day to regain your strength." Eleanor took the cup with trembling hands, studying the man before her. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with the hardened look of someone who had seen his share of battles, but his eyes held a gentleness that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. Mason considered the question. "Because you needed help," he said simply. Then, after a moment, "And because I've seen that symbol before. I know what it means." Fear shot through Eleanor. "You're one of them." "No," Mason said firmly. "Quite the opposite." He touched the Bible that lay on the table. "I believe in a God of mercy, not one who demands flesh and blood." Eleanor's shoulders sagged with relief. She took a careful sip of coffee, the warmth spreading through her chest. "Thank you," she said quietly. Mason nodded. "Rest now. We can talk more when you're stronger." As he moved toward the door, Eleanor noticed the rifle he carried and the way he glanced out the window before stepping outside. He was watching for something or someone. She wasn't the only one with secrets, it seemed. The days passed slowly in the small cabin. Eleanor regained her strength, gradually moving from bed to chair, then to short walks around the cabin's interior. Mason kept his distance, giving her space, while ensuring she had what she needed: food, clean water, fresh bandages for her wounds. On the fourth day, Eleanor ventured outside. The July sun beat down mercilessly, but after months of confinement, even the harsh desert heat felt like freedom. She sat on the porch steps, watching Mason split wood with powerful strokes of an axe. The tightness in her chest eased slightly. Here in this remote place, perhaps she could breathe again. Perhaps she could think about the future, hers and the child's. That evening, Mason prepared a simple meal of beans and cornbread. They ate in silence until Eleanor finally spoke. "My name is Eleanor Winters," she said. "I should have told you before." Mason nodded. "It's good to know who's sharing my roof. I'm sorry for imposing on you." "You're not imposing. It's nice to have company even under these circumstances." He hesitated, then asked, "Where are you from, Eleanor?" "A settlement called Redemption, about 40 miles southeast of here." Mason's expression darkened. "I know of it. Folks say it sprang up almost overnight a few years back." 5 years ago, Eleanor confirmed. "That's when my father brought us there." "Your father?" Eleanor set down her spoon, her appetite gone. "Abraham Winters. He's the leader of the Society of Divine Light." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken questions. Mason didn't press her, simply cleared the dishes and poured them both cups of coffee. "You don't seem surprised," Eleanor noted. "I suspected as much when I saw the pendant." Mason's fingers tapped against his cup. "I know of your father's congregation. They've gained quite a following in these parts." "They call him prophet now," Eleanor said, a bitter edge to her voice. "They believe everything he says." "And what do you believe?" Eleanor looked down at her swollen belly, at the life growing within. "I don't know anymore." Mason seemed to understand. He didn't push further, instead changing the subject. "The baby's due in fall. October, I think." "Well, you're welcome to stay until then if you want. And after, too." Eleanor studied him, searching for hidden motives. "Why would you offer that to a stranger?" Mason was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. "I was married once," he finally said. "Had a son, too. Lost them both to typhoid after the war. This place, it gets lonely." He shrugged. "Besides, I've been running from my past long enough. Maybe it's time to stop running and start helping." There was more to it than that, Eleanor sensed, but she didn't press. Everyone had their secrets. God knew she had enough of her own. That night, as she lay in Mason's bed, he insisted on taking the floor. Despite her protests, Eleanor heard him moving about the cabin. The soft creak of a door opening, then closing. The clink of glass against glass. When he returned to his bedroll near the fireplace, she caught the faint smell of whiskey. Mason Reed was a man haunted by something. Perhaps in time, she would learn what it was. A week passed, then another. July gave way to August, bringing even more oppressive heat. Eleanor's strength returned, and she began to help around the cabin, washing dishes, sweeping floors, even tending to the small vegetable garden out back. Mason showed her how to handle the rifle, though her hands shook too much to be steady. "Just in case," he said, not needing to explain further. They both knew what or who might come looking for her. On a particularly still evening, when the air hung heavy with heat and not even a breeze stirred the dust, they sat together on the porch. The setting sun painted the desert in shades of gold and crimson, the colors reflecting off the distant sandstone cliffs. "It's beautiful in its way," Eleanor said softly. "I never really saw it before." "The desert has its own kind of beauty," Mason agreed. "Harsh, but honest." Eleanor's hand rested on her belly, feeling the child move beneath her palm. "I used to dream of a normal life. A husband, children, a home. Before—" She trailed off, unable to finish. Mason's eyes held a deep sadness. "What happened to you, it wasn't your fault. You know that, don't you?" Eleanor's throat tightened. No one had ever said those words to her before. "My father says it's God's will, that I was chosen." "Your father is wrong." Mason's voice was firm. "What he's doing, what he's done, it has nothing to do with God." "Then why does he believe it so strongly? He wasn't always like this. After my mother died, he changed, started having visions, said an angel came to him in the desert." Eleanor's voice broke. "He used to be kind." Mason was silent for a long moment. "War changes people. Loss changes them even more. Some find their way back. Others don't." "You fought in the war." Mason nodded. "Union Army. Saw things no man should see." He paused, then added, "After I was part of a special unit. We tracked groups that had sprung up in the chaos, people taking advantage of others' pain and fear. Your father's society was one of them, though it was smaller then." Eleanor looked at him sharply. "You knew my father, not personally, but I knew of him. Abraham Winters, former Army surgeon, respected man by all accounts." "He saved many lives during the war," Eleanor said quietly. "That's what he told me. But he couldn't save my mother. She died in childbirth with my brother. The baby died too. I'm sorry." It broke something in him. He said he searched for answers, for a way to ensure such a tragedy never happened again. That's when he found the ancient texts that spoke of purification through blood. Eleanor's voice dropped to a whisper. "He believes the child I carry will bring rain to the desert. That its blood pure, because it comes from father and daughter, will break the drought that's plagued this region." Mason's face hardened. "No child should bear such a burden. No daughter either." Eleanor looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "I believed him at first. I wanted to help, to be special." Shame colored her words. "I didn't understand what it meant until it was too late." Mason reached across the space between them, his weathered hand covering hers. "The past is written, but the future isn't. Not yet." The simple touch, offered without demand or expectation, broke something in Eleanor. Tears she had held back for months spilled down her cheeks. Mason didn't try to stop them, didn't offer empty platitudes. He simply sat with her as the sun slipped below the horizon and stars appeared in the darkening sky. When her tears finally subsided, Eleanor felt lighter somehow. Not healed, never that, but perhaps beginning to heal. "I should check on the horses," Mason said, standing. "Will you be all right?" Eleanor nodded, wiping her face. "I'm fine, thank you." As he walked toward the small stable, Eleanor watched him go. In the fading light, she could see the weight he carried in his shoulders, the careful way he moved as if carrying an invisible burden. Whatever demons haunted Mason Reed, they were old companions. Eleanor returned to the cabin, lighting the oil lamp on the table. As she did, her gaze fell on a small key partially hidden beneath the Bible. Curiosity pushed aside her usual restraint. She picked it up, studying its old-fashioned design. The locked door at the back of the cabin, the one Mason never opened, beckoned to her. It was wrong to pry, she knew. Mason had given her shelter, asked for nothing in return. His secrets were his own. And yet, before she could reconsider, Eleanor was at the door sliding the key into the lock. It turned with a soft click. She hesitated, then pushed the door open. The room beyond was small, more of a storage space than a proper room. A desk stood against one wall, its surface covered with papers and old books. Above it hung a map of the Western Territories with locations marked in red ink. A bookshelf held volumes with titles like Cult Movements of the Post-War Period and Desert Religious Practices a Study. But it was the wall opposite that drew Eleanor's attention. Newspaper clippings, letters, and photographs had been pinned there, connected by red string. At the center was a familiar symbol, the cross inside the sun. Her father's symbol. Eleanor moved closer, reading the headlines, Strange Disappearances in Arizona Territory. Drought continues as religious group predicts end times. Army investigates cult activities in western states. And there, in the midst of it all, a photograph of her father. Younger, without the beard he now wore, but unmistakably Abraham Winters. Beside him stood a Union Army officer in full uniform, a man whose features were hauntingly familiar. Mason Reed. Eleanor stepped back, her breath caught in her throat. They had known each other. Not just known of each other, the photograph showed them standing side by side, smiling as comrades. The sound of footsteps on the porch sent panic through her. Eleanor quickly closed the door, locking it, and returning the key to its place beneath the Bible. She had just settled into a chair with a book when Mason entered. "Storm's coming," he said, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. "Saw lightning to the east." Eleanor nodded, trying to keep her voice steady. "Good. We need the rain." Mason studied her face, his expression unreadable. "Everything all right?" "Yes," she lied. "Just tired. Get some rest then. Tomorrow's another day." That night, Eleanor lay awake long after Mason's breathing had deepened into sleep. The thunder rolled closer, lightning occasionally illuminating the cabin in stark white flashes. In those brief moments of clarity, she studied the sleeping man across the room. Who was Mason Reed really? And what was his connection to her father? Most importantly, could she trust him with her life? With her child's? The storm broke over the cabin with a fury that matched Eleanor's turbulent thoughts. Rain lashed against the windows, wind howling through the eaves. She curled on her side, one hand protectively over her belly. "It's all right," she whispered to the child within. "We're safe here." But even as she said the words, Eleanor wondered if they were true. The rain continued through the night and into the following day, turning the dusty yard to mud and filling the air with the rich scent of wet earth. Eleanor stood on the porch watching the downpour with a mixture of awe and trepidation. "First good rain we've had in months," Mason said, joining her. "Might be the start of the wet season." Eleanor's hand moved to her belly. "My father believes the rain won't come until the child is born." "Well, he's wrong about that too." Mason gestured toward the drenched landscape. "Proof's right there." Eleanor wanted to believe it was that simple, that the rain disproved her father's prophecies, that the child she carried was just a child, not a sacrifice or savior. But years of indoctrination were not so easily washed away. "What if he's right about some things?" she asked softly. "What if the child is special, just not in the way he thinks?" Mason's gaze was kind but firm. "Every child is special, Eleanor. Yours will be no different. Not because of how it was conceived, but because it's yours." The simple truth of his words struck Eleanor with unexpected force. Yours. The child was hers. Whatever happened, whatever came next, this one fact remained. "Thank you," she said, meaning it more deeply than she could express. Mason nodded understanding in his eyes. "I've been thinking," he said after a moment. "When the rain stops, we should go into town. You need proper clothes, things for the baby." Eleanor stiffened. "Is that safe?" "Escalante's a day's ride from here. Small place, but they have what we need. I don't think your father's influence reaches that far yet." The thought of venturing beyond the safety of Mason's land filled Eleanor with dread. But he was right, she couldn't hide forever, and she would need supplies for the birth. "All right," she agreed reluctantly, "when the rain stops." But the rain continued for 3 days, keeping them confined to the cabin. Eleanor used the time to search for more clues about Mason's past, but he kept the key to the back room with him now. Whatever secrets lay within would remain hidden for the time being. On the morning of the 4th day they woke to clear skies and the fresh, clean scent of wet earth. Mason hitched his horses to the wagon, while Eleanor prepared a small bundle of possessions, the few items she had accumulated during her stay. "It's a long ride," Mason warned as he helped her onto the wagon seat. "We'll need to stop along the way." Eleanor nodded, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders despite the warmth of the morning. As the wagon rolled away from the cabin, she glanced back, an inexplicable sense of loss washing over her. In the few short weeks she had been there, the place had begun to feel like home. They traveled in companionable silence for most of the morning, the wagon creaking over the rough terrain. The desert had been transformed by the rain patches of green sprouting from the once barren ground, wildflowers adding splashes of color to the landscape. Around midday, they stopped near a small stream to rest the horses and eat. Mason spread a blanket in the shade of a cottonwood tree, setting out bread, cheese, and dried fruit. "This is nice," Eleanor said, feeling a moment of normalcy that had been absent from her life for so long. Mason smiled, the expression softening his weathered features. "Simple pleasures." As they ate, Eleanor gathered her courage. "I saw the photograph," she said finally. "You and my father, during the war." Mason's hand stilled a piece of bread halfway to his mouth. "You went into the back room." "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have." He sighed, setting the bread down. "No, you shouldn't have. But I suppose you deserve to know." He leaned back against the tree trunk. "Your father saved my life at Antietam. I took a Confederate bullet to the chest. By all rights, I should have died on that field. But Abraham Winters was the surgeon who operated on me, pulled the bullet out, stopped the bleeding. That doesn't explain why you're tracking him now." "I'm not tracking him. Not exactly." Mason's gaze turned distant. "After the war, I was part of a special unit under the War Department. We investigated groups that had sprung up in the chaos cults, extremists, charlatans, preying on people's grief. Your father's name came up." "Because of the society," Mason nodded. "It was smaller then, just starting, but the reports were disturbing. I couldn't believe the man who had saved so many lives, including mine, could be involved in something so dark. So you came to find him." "I tried. By the time I tracked him to Nevada, he had already moved on. The trail went cold." Mason's eyes returned to her. "I never expected to find his daughter on my doorstep all these years later." Eleanor absorbed this information slowly. "Did you know who I was when you found me?" "No, not until you told me your name." Mason hesitated, then added, "I didn't save you because of who your father is, Eleanor. I saved you because you needed saving." She believed him. Despite everything, the secrets, the locked room, the years of investigation, she believed Mason Reed was a good man. "We should get moving," Mason said, standing. We've got a long way to go before dark." They packed up and continued their journey, the wagon rolling steadily eastward. As the afternoon wore on, Eleanor noticed Mason becoming increasingly vigilant, his gaze scanning the horizon, hand never far from the rifle at his side. "What is it?" she asked. "Probably nothing," he said, but his tone belied his words. "Just being cautious." As they crested a small rise, the landscape opened before them. In the distance, a cluster of buildings marked the town of Escalante. But it was what lay between them and the town that made Eleanor's blood run cold. A rider approaching fast from the east. Mason pulled the wagon to a halt, reaching for his rifle. "Stay down," he instructed, helping Eleanor into the bed of the wagon where she would be less visible. The rider drew closer, dust rising from his horse's hooves. Mason stood rifle ready, but not yet raised. "That's far enough," he called when the rider was within earshot. The man reined his horse to a stop about 20 yards away. He was tall and lean, with the dark, weathered skin of someone who had spent years under the desert sun. A revolver hung at his hip, but he made no move toward it. "I'm looking for Mason Reed," the rider called. "You found him?" "Captain Wallace sent me. Said to tell you, the prophet is gathering his flock." Eleanor's heart hammered in her chest. Captain Wallace, the name meant nothing to her, but the message was clear enough. Mason's posture relaxed slightly, though his grip on the rifle remained firm. "What else did the captain say?" "Said to watch the crossroads. They've been seen as far west as Cedar City." "When?" "3 days ago, moving east." Mason nodded grimly. "Thank you for the warning." The rider touched the brim of his hat, then turned his horse and rode back toward town. "Who was that?" Eleanor asked when he was gone. "A friend, or rather, a friend of a friend." Mason helped her back onto the wagon seat. "Change of plans. We're going back to the cabin." "But the supplies, they'll have to wait." Mason's expression was grave. "Your father's people are moving this way. We need to be somewhere defensible when they arrive." Fear so familiar it was almost comforting settled over Eleanor like a shroud. "They're coming for me." "Yes." Mason snapped the reins, turning the wagon around. "But they'll have to go through me first." As they rode back toward the cabin, the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert floor. Eleanor watched the land pass by its beauty, now tainted by dread. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I've brought this trouble to your door." Mason glanced at her, his blue eyes steady. "Trouble and I are old acquaintances, Eleanor. Don't worry about me." But she did worry. This man who had saved her without question, who had given her shelter and kindness when she needed it most, was now placing himself between her and danger. He didn't deserve to be drawn into her nightmare. "We could go somewhere else," she suggested. "Somewhere they wouldn't find us." Mason shook his head. "The cabin is the safest place. I know every approach, every line of sight. If they come, that's where we make our stand." The word "we" did not escape Eleanor's notice. Whatever came next, she would not face it alone. The realization brought both comfort and a deeper fear, not for herself now, but for Mason. They reached the cabin, as darkness fell, the night air growing cool after the heat of the day. Mason unhitched the horses and led them into the small stable while Eleanor went inside lighting lamps and stoking the fire that had died to embers in their absence. When Mason joined her, his expression was grim. "There's something you should know," he said, removing his hat and running a hand through his graying hair. "Something I should have told you earlier." Eleanor sat at the table, bracing herself for whatever revelation was coming. Mason took a deep breath. "Your father and I weren't just acquaintances during the war. We were friends. Good friends. I gathered as much from the photograph. It was more than that. Mason's voice grew heavy with memory. Before the war, I was a professor of theology at a small college in Massachusetts. I specialized in ancient religious texts, particularly those from desert cultures. Abraham was a doctor, but he had an interest in my field. We corresponded for years before finally meeting during the war. Eleanor tried to reconcile this information with what she knew of her father. He never mentioned you. I'm not surprised. What happened after the war? It changed everything. Mason paced the small room. Abraham lost his wife, your mother, and the baby. He was devastated, started searching for answers in ancient texts, trying to make sense of his loss. The Desert Scrolls, Eleanor murmured. Mason nodded. Yes, but he misinterpreted them. Badly. The texts speak of sacrifice, yes, but not of blood or flesh. They speak of sacrificing one's pride, one's selfish desires. It's a metaphorical cleansing, not a literal one. You tried to tell him this. I tried. By then he'd fallen under the influence of a man named Joshua, your uncle, I believe. Eleanor's breath caught. Uncle Joshua. He's my father's younger brother. Joshua twisted the texts, manipulated Abraham's grief. By the time I realized what was happening, the society had already formed around them. Mason's eyes held a deep regret. I failed to stop it. Failed your father. And I've been tracking their movements ever since, trying to find a way to undo the damage. Eleanor absorbed this information slowly, pieces falling into place. That's why you helped me. Not just because I needed help, but because of who I am. Partly, Mason admitted, but mostly because no one deserves what was done to you. No one. The simple, honest words broke through Eleanor's carefully constructed walls. Tears filled her eyes, spilling down her cheeks. I was so afraid, she whispered. All the time. Afraid of disappointing him, afraid of the rituals, afraid of what would happen to the baby. Mason moved to her side, kneeling beside her chair. You don't have to be afraid anymore. I won't let them take you back. I promise. The conviction in his voice, the steadiness of his gaze, Eleanor wanted desperately to believe him. But she had seen the fervor in her father's eyes, felt the devotion of his followers. They would not give up easily. What happens now? She asked, wiping away tears. Now we prepare. They might not come for days, even weeks. But when they do, we'll be ready. Eleanor nodded, straightening her shoulders. She had run once before, found the courage to escape. She would find that courage again. As if sensing her resolve, the child within her kicked a strong, purposeful movement. Eleanor placed a hand over the spot, feeling the life that depended on her, that trusted her completely. For you, she whispered to her unborn child. I'll be brave for you. Outside, the desert night grew still, stars appearing one by one in the vast expanse of sky. In the distance, a coyote howled, a lonely, haunting sound that seemed to echo Eleanor's own fears. But for the first time in months, those fears did not overwhelm her. They were there, yes, a constant presence. But alongside them grew something new, hope. The days that followed settled into a rhythm of vigilant preparation. Mason reinforced the cabin's windows and doors, stockpiled ammunition, and kept the horses saddled and ready, in case they needed to flee. Eleanor helped where she could, preparing food that would keep, gathering medical supplies, watching the horizon for approaching riders. But no one came. A week passed, then another. August burned hot and bright, then began to wane. Eleanor's belly grew rounder, the child within more active. At night, she would feel it moving, tiny hands and feet pressing against the confines of her womb. Each movement was a reminder of what was at stake. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, Mason returned from checking the perimeter. He found Eleanor on the porch, one hand on her belly, humming softly. "Old hymn?" he asked, settling beside her on the step. Eleanor nodded. "Amazing Grace. My mother used to sing it. It's a good one." They sat in companionable silence as darkness fell. The first stars appeared bright points of light in the deepening blue. "Do you think they've given up?" Eleanor asked finally. Mason's expression was somber. "No, they're waiting for something. The birth. Maybe, or reinforcements." He glanced at her. "Your father's influence has grown. The society has chapters across the territory now." The thought chilled Eleanor, despite the warmth of the evening. "How do you know?" Mason hesitated, then stood. "Come with me." He led her to the back room, unlocking the door and ushering her inside. In the lamplight, the wall of documents and maps seemed even more ominous than before. "I've been tracking their movements for years," Mason explained, pointing to markers on the map. "At first it was just the original settlement near Redemption, but then they expanded here to Cedar City, here to St. George, even as far as Flagstaff." Eleanor studied the map, the red pins marking the society's reach. "All these places, all of them, and more I probably don't know about." Mason tapped a recent newspaper clipping. "They're gaining converts because of the drought. People are desperate, and your father offers them hope rain in exchange for faith. And when the rain doesn't come, he blames lack of faith or says the time isn't right yet." Mason's voice hardened. "Classic cult tactics. Promise salvation, then shift the blame when it doesn't materialize." Eleanor sank into the desk chair, overwhelmed by the scope of what they faced. "How can we fight this? It's just the two of us. We're not entirely alone." Mason pulled out a drawer, revealing a stack of letters. "I have contacts, former colleagues from my War Department days. They've been helping me gather information." "Like Captain Wallace," Mason nodded. "Thomas Wallace. Good man. He's been watching the Society's movements in the Eastern Territories." Eleanor picked up one of the letters, scanning its contents. "This says they're looking for me, that my father has sent search parties in all directions." "Yes, but they don't know where you are. Not yet." "But they will eventually." Eleanor's hand moved to her belly. "What happens when the baby comes? We can't hide forever." Mason knelt before her, his weathered hands taking hers. "Eleanor, listen to me. I made a promise to protect you and your child. I intend to keep that promise, whatever it takes." The conviction in his voice, the steady strength in his eyes, Eleanor wanted to believe him, needed to believe him. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why risk everything for us?" Mason's gaze dropped to their joined hands. "Because I failed your father once. I won't fail his daughter." He looked up, meeting her eyes again. "And because every child deserves to be born into love, not fear." The simple truth of his words pierced Eleanor's heart. Love, not fear. Was it possible? Could she offer this child something she herself had never known? "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know, but you're also brave." Mason squeezed her hands gently. "Braver than you know." Outside, a horse whinnied, the sound sharp in the quiet night. Mason was on his feet, instantly reaching for the rifle, leaning against the wall. "Stay here," he ordered, moving swiftly to the door. Eleanor followed, despite his instruction, heart pounding. From the porch, she could see a lone rider approaching from the east, silhouetted against the star-filled sky. Mason raised his rifle, taking aim. "That's far enough," he called when the rider was within earshot. The man reined his horse to a stop. "I come in peace," he called back, his voice carrying clearly in the still night air. "I bear a message from Abraham Winters." Eleanor's breath caught. Her father had found her. "Show yourself," Mason demanded, rifle still raised. The rider moved forward slowly until the light from the cabin windows illuminated his features. He was younger than Eleanor expected, perhaps 30, with a neatly trimmed beard and the intense eyes of a true believer. Around his neck hung the familiar pendant, the cross within the sun. "My name is Joshua," he said, and Eleanor's heart turned to ice. "I am a messenger of the light." Her uncle, the man who had twisted her father's grief into something monstrous. The architect of her suffering. Mason's finger tightened on the rifle's trigger. "State your business and be quick about it." Joshua's gaze moved past Mason to Eleanor, standing frozen on the porch. A smile curved his lips. "Ah, the Blessed Mother, we've been searching for you, child." "She's not going anywhere with you," Mason growled. "That is for her to decide." Joshua's voice was smooth, reasonable. "Eleanor, your father is concerned for you. For the child. It needs proper care, proper blessing." Eleanor found her voice at last. "The kind of blessing that involves a knife." Joshua shook his head, his expression sorrowful. "You misunderstand the ritual. The marking is symbolic, a sign of the child's special purpose. No harm will come to either of you." "Liar!" Eleanor spat, anger replacing fear. "I heard you and Father talking. I know what you plan to do with the baby. The child will bring rain to the desert," Joshua said, his voice taking on a fervent edge. "It will save countless lives. Surely that is worth some sacrifice." Mason stepped forward, placing himself between Eleanor and Joshua. "The only one making sacrifices here is you. Now deliver your message and go." Joshua's gaze hardened. "Very well. Abraham Winters sends this word, 'Return to us willingly, daughter, and all will be forgiven. Stay away, and others will take your place.'" He paused, letting the words sink in. "He has found another who is willing to bear the sacred child if you refuse your duty." Horror washed through Eleanor. Another girl, another victim. "He wouldn't," she whispered. "The ritual must be completed," Joshua said simply, "with or without you." Mason's voice cut through Eleanor's shock. "You've delivered your message. Now go." Joshua smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "One more thing. The girl should ask you about the fire, Mr. Reed. About the child who died in the flames." Eleanor looked at Mason, whose face had gone pale. "You don't understand the power of true faith," Joshua continued. "But you will. You all will." He turned his horse, then called over his shoulder, "We'll be waiting, Eleanor, when you're ready to return to your family." They watched in silence as he rode away, his figure gradually swallowed by the darkness. Only when he was completely gone did Mason lower his rifle. "What did he mean?" Eleanor asked, her voice small. "About the fire. About a child." Mason's jaw tightened. "Not now, Eleanor. Please." But she persisted. "He knew something about you. Something you haven't told me." Mason turned away, his shoulders tense. "We all have secrets." "Not anymore," Eleanor said firmly. "Not if I'm trusting you with my life, with my child's life." For a long moment, Mason stood motionless, his back to her. Then, with a deep sigh, he nodded. "You're right. You deserve the truth." He gestured toward the cabin. "Come inside. It's a long story, and not one I like to tell." Eleanor followed him, fear and curiosity warring within her. Whatever secret Mason had been keeping, Joshua knew it, which meant her father knew it too. And somehow she suspected it was the key to everything that had happened, to everything that was still to come. The door closed behind them, shutting out the night and the watching stars. But not the danger. Never the danger. That remained patient and hungry, waiting for its moment to strike. Mason Reed sat before the fire shadows, playing across his weathered face. The flames reflected in his eyes, dancing like the memories he could no longer outrun. Eleanor waited, perched on the edge of the chair opposite him, hands folded protectively over her swollen belly. "I was married once." Mason began, his voice low and rough with emotion. "Her name was Rebecca. She was a nurse during the war. That's how we met. After Antietam, when your father saved my life, she was the one who nursed me back to health." Eleanor watched him, seeing the pain etched into the lines of his face. "We married after the war ended. Had a son. Named him Samuel." A ghost of a smile touched Mason's lips. He had his mother's eyes. Kindest eyes you ever saw. The fire crackled, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the desert night pressed close against the cabin windows. "I was still working for the War Department, then tracking dangerous groups across the territories." Rebecca understood the importance of the work, but she worried. "Wanted me to take a teaching position somewhere safe." Mason's fingers tightened around the cup he held. "I should have listened." Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "What happened to them?" Mason stared into the fire, seeing not the flames before him, but those of another time, another place. "I was investigating a splinter group in Colorado. Former Confederate soldiers who'd turned to religion as a cover for their activities. They were dangerous, had already killed 2 federal agents." He took a deep breath, the memory visibly paining him. "I got too close. They found out who I was, where my family lived. Decided to send a message." Eleanor's hand went to her mouth. "They killed your wife and son. They set fire to our home while I was away. Rebecca, she got Samuel out. Neighbors saw her carry him from the burning house." Mason's voice grew tight. "But then she went back in. Maybe for keepsakes, maybe thinking someone else was trapped. The roof collapsed. She never came out. And your son, gone." Mason's voice broke on the word. "By the time I returned, there was nothing left. Just ashes and rumors. Some said Samuel died of smoke inhalation. Others claimed he was taken." "Taken by whom? The cult members, perhaps. Or maybe kind strangers who thought he'd been orphaned." Mason shook his head. "I searched for years, never found a trace of him." Eleanor tried to imagine the pain losing a child, never knowing their fate. It was unbearable to contemplate. "I'm so sorry," she said softly. Mason nodded, acknowledging her sympathy. "After that, I left the War Department. Couldn't bear it anymore. Bought this piece of land as far from people as I could get." His eyes met hers. "Until you showed up on my doorstep." "But what did Joshua mean?" Eleanor pressed gently. "How does he know about the fire? That's what troubles me." Mason set his cup down, leaning forward. "Only a handful of people know the details of what happened. Your father wasn't one of them." "Could Joshua have connections to the Colorado group?" "Possibly. The territories are vast, but the circles of power are small." Mason rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. Or perhaps he's just using information gathered by the Society's followers. They're everywhere now, watching, listening. The thought sent a shiver through Eleanor, eyes everywhere watching. Just like in redemption, where the faithful reported every transgression, every doubt, every whispered question. "What does this mean for us?" she asked. "It means they know more about me than I'd like, and they're trying to drive a wedge between us." Mason's expression hardened. "Joshua wants you to doubt me, to question whether you can trust me with your safety, with your child's safety." Eleanor considered this. "Can I trust you?" Mason met her gaze steadily. "Yes. Whatever mistakes I've made, whatever failures haunt me, I give you my word I will protect you and your child with my life." The conviction in his voice, the unwavering certainty in his eyes, Eleanor believed him. Despite the secrets, despite the hidden past, she believed this man would stand between her and harm. "Thank you," she said simply, "for telling me, for everything." Mason nodded, then stood, moving to the window. He peered out into the darkness, scanning the horizon. "Joshua's visit means they know where you are now. They'll be back and not alone next time. What do we do?" "We prepare." Mason turned back to her. "And we decide how to face what's coming." That night, Eleanor lay awake long after Mason had fallen asleep. Her mind raced with all she had learned about Mason's past, about Joshua's warning about the girl who would take her place if she didn't return. Another innocent, another victim. The thought was intolerable. Yet the alternative was unthinkable. Return to redemption, to her father's compound, to the rituals and the pain and the terrible future planned for her child. Never. Eleanor placed a hand on her belly, feeling the baby shift beneath her palm. "I won't let them take you," she whispered. "I promise." But as the hours crept by and sleep remained elusive, doubt crept in like the desert cold. What chance did they really have, one aging former agent and a pregnant girl, against the growing power of the society, against her father's conviction and Joshua's manipulation? The odds were long, perhaps impossible. But then she had already done the impossible once. She had escaped, had found safety, had discovered an unexpected ally in Mason Reed. Perhaps, just perhaps, the impossible could happen again. The next morning dawned clear and hot, the sun rising over the eastern mountains to cast long shadows across the desert floor. Eleanor found Mason already awake, cleaning his rifle at the kitchen table. "We should leave," she said without preamble. "Find somewhere else to hide." Mason looked up, his expression grave. "And go where the society has eyes everywhere now. We might make it to another territory, but for how long? How far can you travel in your condition?" Eleanor knew he was right. The baby was due in less than 2 months. Even if they fled now, they would need to stop somewhere for the birth. And then they would be vulnerable again. "Then what do we do?" she asked, frustration edging her voice. "Wait for them to come for us." "No, we fight." Mason set the rifle down. "But first, we need allies." He stood, moving to the back room. When he returned, he carried a stack of letters, which he placed on the table. "I've been corresponding with Captain Wallace and others who share our concerns about the society. They've been gathering evidence, building a case against your father and Joshua." "A case?" Eleanor frowned. "You mean to have them arrested?" "Eventually, yes, but first we need to break their power. Show their followers that the prophecies are false, that the promised rain won't come through ritual and blood." "How?" Mason hesitated. "There's a U.S. Marshal in Escalante now, man named Hollister. Wallace says he's trustworthy, interested in our cause. I'm going to ride out to meet him today, see what help he can offer." Alarm shot through Eleanor. "You're leaving just for the day. I'll be back by nightfall." Mason's eyes softened at her obvious fear. "You'll be safe here. The cabin is secure, and I've never seen the society move during daylight." Eleanor wanted to protest, to beg him not to go, but she swallowed her fear. This wasn't just about her anymore, or even her child. It was about all the other girls who might suffer, as she had all the potential victims of her father's twisted faith. "All right," she agreed reluctantly, "but be careful." "Always am." Mason finished his preparations, strapping on his holster and checking his ammunition. At the door, he turned back. "Keep the rifle close. Remember what I taught you." Eleanor nodded, though the thought of using the weapon still filled her with dread. She had never fired a gun in anger, had never harmed another living soul. Even now, after everything, the idea of violence felt foreign to her nature. But to protect her child, for that, she would do anything. She watched from the porch as Mason rode away, his figure growing smaller against the vast landscape until he disappeared over a distant rise. Then, with a deep breath, she went back inside and bolted the door. The day stretched endlessly before her. Eleanor tried to occupy herself with household tasks, sweeping the floor, preparing a stew for supper, mending a tear in one of the shirts Mason had given her. But her mind kept returning to the dangers that surrounded them, to the uncertain future that awaited her child. As the sun reached its zenith, beating down mercilessly on the cabin roof, Eleanor retreated to the relative coolness of the back room. Mason had left it unlocked, perhaps, as a gesture of trust after sharing his secrets the night before. She studied the wall of documents, trying to make sense of the web Mason had constructed. Newspaper clippings, maps, letters, all connected by red string to the central symbol of the society. Her father's legacy. Her nightmare. One document caught her eye, a faded photograph of her father and Joshua standing before a simple wooden church. The caption, written in Mason's neat hand, read, "Abraham and Joshua Winters, Cedar City, 1882. Eleanor stared at the image, searching the faces of the two men who had shaped her fate. Her father looked different than she remembered, younger, yes, but also more peaceful. The wild-eyed fervor that had characterized his later years was absent. Beside him, Joshua stood straight and proud, one hand resting possessively on Abraham's shoulder. A chill ran through Eleanor. Had Joshua been manipulating her father even then? Had he seen in Abraham's grief a tool to be used, a vehicle for his own ambitions? She remembered Joshua as a child, quiet, watchful, always in the shadow of his brilliant older brother. What had changed him? What had turned that silent boy into the architect of so much suffering? A sound from outside pulled Eleanor from her thoughts, the creak of a wagon wheel, the soft nicker of a horse. Her heart jumped. Mason returning already, or someone else. Moving quietly to the front room, she took up the rifle Mason had left for her, checking that it was loaded as he had taught her. Then cautiously, she approached the window, staying to one side to peer out without being seen. A wagon had stopped in the yard, but it wasn't Mason's. This one was larger, with a canvas cover stretched over its frame. A man sat on the driver's bench, a stranger not dressed in the distinctive black clothing of the society's members, but in the practical garb of a frontier trader. "Hello, the house," the man called. "Anybody home?" Eleanor remained silent, rifle ready. "I've got supplies," the man continued. "Ordered by Mason Reed. Said to deliver them today." Suspicion warred with curiosity in Eleanor's mind. Mason had mentioned nothing about supplies, but then they had been planning to go to town before Joshua's visit changed everything. Perhaps Mason had arranged this delivery as an alternative, or perhaps it was a trap. "Leave them on the porch," she called back. keeping out of sight. "Mr. Reed isn't here right now." The man hesitated, then climbed down from the wagon. "There's quite a bit, ma'am. Some of it's heavy. Sure you don't want help bringing it in?" "Just leave it," Eleanor repeated firmly. "I'll manage." The man shrugged, then began unloading crates and sacks from the wagon, stacking them on the porch. Eleanor watched carefully, noting that he seemed genuinely focused on his task, not on trying to gain entry to the cabin. When he had finished, he tipped his hat toward the house. "That's everything, ma'am. Mr. Reed already paid, so no need to worry about that. You have a good day now." He climbed back onto the wagon and with a flick of the reins set off the way he had come. Eleanor waited until he was well away before unlocking the door and stepping cautiously onto the porch. The supplies were extensive: flour, sugar, coffee, dried meat, canned goods, even fabric and thread. Enough to last through the winter if necessary. Tucked into one of the crates was a note in Mason's handwriting, "Just in case, M.R." Relief washed through Eleanor. This was Mason's doing. He had been preparing for a siege, ensuring they would have what they needed if leaving the cabin became impossible. She spent the next hour bringing the supplies inside, organizing them in the small pantry. The work was exhausting in her condition, but it kept her mind occupied, prevented her from dwelling on the dangers that lurked beyond the cabin walls. As afternoon gave way to evening, Eleanor's anxiety grew. Mason had promised to return by nightfall, but the sun was already sinking toward the horizon with no sign of him. Had something happened in town? Had the society intercepted him, or was he simply delayed by his meeting with the marshal? Eleanor paced the small cabin, pausing occasionally to look out the window toward the eastern trail. The shadows lengthened, darkness seeping across the land like spilled ink. Still, no Mason. She prepared supper, the stew simmering on the stove, filling the cabin with its rich aroma. She set the table for two, refusing to consider the possibility that Mason might not return to share the meal. Night fell completely. Eleanor lit the lamps, their golden glow a defiant stand against the darkness outside. She sat at the table, the rifle across her knees, and waited. 1 hour passed. Then another. The fear she had been holding at bay began to creep in, wrapping cold fingers around her heart. Something was wrong. Mason should have been back by now. A sound outside made her tense hoofbeats approaching fast. Eleanor stood, moving to the window. In the moonlight, she could make out a single rider coming hard up the trail. Relief surged through her. Mason at last. But as the rider drew closer, Eleanor's relief turned to ice in her veins. The figure was too slight to be Mason, the horse unfamiliar. She raised the rifle, steadying it against the window frame as the rider pulled up before the cabin. In the spill of lamplight from the windows, she could see it was a young man, barely more than a boy, his face pale with urgency. "Hello," he called. "Is anyone there? I bring news from Escalante." Eleanor hesitated, then cracked the door, keeping the rifle visible. "What news?" The boy's eyes widened at the sight of the weapon, but he stood his ground. "Are you Miss Winters? The lady staying with Mr. Reed?" "I am." "What's happened? Where is Mason?" "He sent me, ma'am. Said to tell you he's been delayed. There's trouble in town, men asking questions, looking for a girl matching your description." The boy swallowed hard. "Mr. Reed said to tell you to bar the doors and be ready. He'll come as soon as he can, but it might not be till morning." Eleanor's grip tightened on the rifle. These men, did they wear pendants? A cross inside a sun? The boy nodded. "Yes, ma'am. About a dozen of them, led by a tall man with a beard. They've been going door to door, offering rewards for information." Joshua. It had to be. "Thank you for bringing the message," Eleanor said, already calculating what to do next. "Is there anything else?" "Just that Mr. Reed is with the marshal. They're trying to get the strangers to leave town peacefully." The boy shifted nervously. "And he said if he doesn't come back by noon tomorrow, you should take the South Trail to Cedar City. Someone named Wallace will help you there." The implication was clear. If Mason didn't return, it meant he couldn't. Eleanor fought down a wave of panic. She couldn't lose him now, not when he was the only ally she had. "I understand," she said, keeping her voice steady. "Thank you." The boy nodded, then turned his horse and rode back the way he had come, disappearing into the night. Eleanor closed and barred the door, her mind racing. The society was closing in. Mason was in danger, and she was alone, heavily pregnant, with enemies drawing ever nearer. What would happen if Mason didn't return? Could she make it to Cedar City on her own? And even if she did, how could she be sure this Wallace person would help her? Too many questions, too few answers. Eleanor moved through the cabin, checking that all windows were secured, all blinds drawn. Then she extinguished all but one lamp, not wanting to provide a beacon for anyone who might be watching from the darkness. Returning to the kitchen table, she sat with the rifle across her lap, waiting. For Mason's return. For dawn. For whatever might come in the long hours of the night. Outside, the desert lay silent under the cold light of the stars. No sound disturbed the stillness, no hoofbeats, no voices, no sign that danger approached. But Eleanor knew better than to trust the silence. In redemption, the most terrible things had often happened in perfect quiet. The midnight rituals, the whispered prayers, the cutting of flesh. Her hand moved to her belly, to the scar that marked her skin. Never again, she vowed silently. They would never touch her child. The hours crept by, measured only by the steady tick of the clock on the mantel. Eleanor fought against exhaustion, against the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. She needed to stay alert, to be ready. But as midnight came and went, her eyelids grew heavy, her thoughts disjointed. Despite her best efforts, she found herself drifting the rifle's weight, becoming a distant sensation as sleep claimed her. She dreamed of rain again, but this time it wasn't blood that fell from the sky, but clear, life-giving water. In the dream, Mason stood beside her, his face peaceful as they watched the desert bloom. And in her arms was a child, her child safe and whole and untouched by ritual or prophecy. A crack of thunder jolted Eleanor awake. For a moment, she thought it was part of the dream, the storm bringing blessed rain to the parched land. But then it came again, and she realized it wasn't thunder at all. It was a gunshot. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs as another gunshot split the night. She scrambled to her feet, rifle clutched in trembling hands. From outside came the sound of hoofbeats, voices, men shouting orders, the creak of wagon wheels. They had found her. She moved to the window, carefully peering past the edge of the curtain. In the moonlight, she could make out several riders circling the cabin. A wagon had pulled up near the stable, and men were dismounting, carrying torches that cast wild, dancing shadows across the yard. At their center stood a tall figure Eleanor would recognize anywhere: Joshua, her uncle, the architect of her suffering. But it wasn't his presence that made her blood run cold. It was the man beside him, older, with a full beard streaked with gray, wearing the black coat and wide-brimmed hat of the society's elders. Her father, Abraham Winters. Eleanor's grip tightened on the rifle. She had known this moment would come, had prepared for it as best she could. But seeing her father there so close, after months of running and hiding, sent waves of conflicting emotions through her: fear, anger, and beneath it all a shameful whisper of longing for the man he had been before madness claimed him. "Eleanor," Joshua's voice carried clearly through the night air. We know you're in there. Come out now, and no one needs to get hurt." She remained silent, mind racing. Where was Mason? Had they intercepted him on his way back from town? Was he alive? "Your father has come to bring you home," Joshua continued. "He forgives your transgression. The child will still fulfill its purpose." Eleanor moved away from the window, back pressed against the wall. Think she told herself. What would Mason do? He would hold his ground. Wait for an opportunity. Use what advantages he had. She had the cabin's solid walls' defensible position. She had the rifle with ammunition. And she had her wits, which had already saved her once before. It would have to be enough. Another voice called out, then deeper, rougher with age and emotion. "Eleanor, daughter, please. This has gone on long enough." Her father. The sound of his voice, once so beloved, now sent chills down her spine. "The prophecy must be fulfilled," Abraham continued. "The drought worsens. People are suffering, dying. Only the sacred child can bring the rain." Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself. Then she moved to a different window, one that gave her a better view of the men surrounding the cabin. "Father," she called, keeping the rifle ready, "go home. There will be no sacrifice. Not me, not my child." She saw Abraham flinch at the word sacrifice, saw uncertainty cross his face, but Joshua stepped forward, his hand on the older man's shoulder. "The ritual requires no sacrifice, Eleanor," Joshua shouted. "Only blessing. You've been misled by the outsider, the unbeliever." "Mason Reed speaks the truth," Eleanor countered. "He knows the ancient texts better than you, better than Father. The ritual you created is a perversion of their meaning." She saw Joshua's face harden, saw him confer quickly with several men nearby. They spread out, moving to surround the cabin completely. "Where is Reed?" Joshua demanded. "Is he in there with you?" Eleanor didn't answer. Let them wonder. Let them waste time and caution preparing for an adversary who wasn't present. "We have him," Joshua called after a moment. "Captured in town. If you want him to live, you'll come with us now." A bluff, Eleanor thought. It had to be. If they truly had Mason, they would have brought him as leverage. "I don't believe you," she called back. "Believe what you will. His fate is sealed unless you cooperate." Joshua's voice hardened. "You have until dawn to decide. Come willingly, or we'll burn this place to the ground, with you in it." The threat hung in the air, terrible in its simplicity. Eleanor had no doubt they would do it. She had seen the society's ruthlessness firsthand, had borne its marks on her flesh. "Think of your child," Abraham called, his voice breaking. "Please, Eleanor, I don't want to lose you." There was genuine pain in his words. A father's love twisted, but not extinguished by madness. For a moment, Eleanor almost wavered. Then she remembered the rituals, the knife, the blood. "You lost me the moment you believed Joshua's lies," she said loud enough for all to hear. "The moment you chose prophecy over your own daughter." She saw her father stagger as if struck. Joshua gripped his arm, steadying him, whispering urgently in his ear. Then, abruptly, the men withdrew, retreating to a safe distance from the cabin, but maintaining their circle around it. They set up lanterns, establishing a perimeter beyond rifle range, settling in for a siege. Dawn was hours away, hours in which Eleanor needed to either find a way to escape or prepare for a final stand. She moved through the cabin, gathering what she might need: water, ammunition, Mason's spare revolver. Her mind raced, considering and discarding options. She could try to slip away in darkness, but the men were surely watching every approach. She could wait for Mason, but what if he didn't come in time? As she worked, a new pain gripped her, sharp, insistent, radiating from her lower back around to her belly. Eleanor froze, one hand braced against the table as the contractions squeezed her body. No, not now. It was too early. The pain eased, leaving her gasping. Just a false alarm, she told herself. The stress, the fear, her body was reacting naturally. But when another contraction hit 20 minutes later, Eleanor knew with sinking certainty that this was no false alarm. The child was coming. Of all the times, of all the circumstances, this was surely the worst possible moment for labor to begin. Trapped in a cabin surrounded by enemies with no help, no midwife, and still weeks before her due date. Eleanor forced herself to breathe slowly, to remain calm. Panic would only make things worse. She had witnessed births in Redemption, had helped the midwife deliver other women's babies. She knew the process, at least in theory. But she had also seen births go wrong, had seen women die, children lost. The thought of facing that alone with Joshua and her father waiting outside like vultures was almost unbearable. "Please," she whispered, uncertain whether she was addressing God or Mason or the child itself. "Please wait, just a little longer." The contractions continued, irregular but unmistakable. Eleanor moved to the bed, lying down to conserve her strength. She kept the rifle beside her within easy reach. Outside, the night stretched on, the silence broken only by the occasional movement of the men keeping watch. Eleanor drifted in and out of awareness, pain bringing her sharply back whenever she began to slip into exhaustion. Then, sometime in the darkest hour before dawn, a new sound reached her, a low rumble in the distance. At first, she thought it was thunder, a storm approaching from the west. But the sound grew louder, more distinct. Hoofbeats. Many horses riding hard. Eleanor struggled to her feet, moving to the window despite the pain that gripped her. In the faint pre-dawn light, she could see confusion in the society's camp men, standing reaching for weapons, peering into the gloom. Then, from the eastern ridge riders appeared a dozen or more silhouetted against the lightening sky. At their head rode a familiar figure, tall and broad-shouldered. Mason. Relief flooded through Eleanor, so intense it nearly brought her to her knees. He had come, and he had brought help. The society's men scrambled to mount their horses to form a defensive line. Joshua shouted orders, his voice high with alarm. Abraham stood apart, watching the approaching riders with an expression Eleanor couldn't read. The newcomers thundered into the yard, rifles raised. Leading them was Mason, his face grim with purpose. Beside him rode a man wearing the star of a U.S. Marshal Hollister, Eleanor presumed. "Joshua Winters," the marshal shouted, "you and your men are under arrest for kidnapping, assault, and criminal conspiracy." Joshua's response was to draw his revolver and fire. The shot went wide, but it was enough to trigger chaos. Gunfire erupted from both sides, men shouting, horses rearing in panic. Eleanor dropped to the floor, crawling away from the window as bullets thudded into the cabin walls. Another contraction seized her stronger than before, forcing a cry from her lips. The battle outside raged for what seemed like hours, but was likely only minutes. Gradually, the gunfire slowed, then stopped altogether. Eleanor heard voices calling men surrendering. Then a pounding at the door. "Eleanor," Mason's voice urgent with concern. "Eleanor, are you all right?" "I'm here," she called, making her way painfully to the door. She slid the bolt back, and Mason burst in his face, streaked with dirt and gunpowder, a bloody gash across his cheek. His eyes widened as he took in her condition, her pale face, the way she clutched her belly. "The baby." Eleanor nodded, another contraction building. It's coming. Too early. Mason helped her to the bed, his strong arms supporting her weight. We've got them, Eleanor. The marshals arrested Joshua and most of his men. It's over. My father, she gasped as the pain peaked. Mason's expression darkened. He's alive. Wounded, but alive. Eleanor closed her eyes, relief and anguish mingling in her heart. Despite everything, she couldn't wish her father dead. The marshals sending for the doctor from Escalante, Mason continued, but it'll be hours before he can get here. The baby won't wait, Eleanor said, certainty in her voice. Mason nodded grimly. I've delivered foals and calves. It's not the same, but he squared his shoulders. I'll do my best. Outside, the sky lightened as dawn broke over the desert. The marshal entered the cabin, hat in hand. Ma'am, he greeted Eleanor with a respectful nod. We've secured the area. The doctor's been sent for. Thank you, Eleanor managed between breaths. There's something else, the marshal continued, his gaze shifting to Mason. The prisoner Joshua Winters. He's asking to speak with you. Says it's about your son. Mason froze his face, draining of color. My son is dead. He claims otherwise. The marshal's expression was guarded. Says he can prove it. Eleanor saw the conflict in Mason's eyes, the desperate hope warring with suspicion, with the fear of being manipulated. Go, she urged him. I'll be all right for a few minutes. Mason hesitated, torn between his duty to Eleanor and the pull of a possibility too potent to ignore. I'll be right back, he promised, squeezing her hand. Marshal Hollister will stay with you. He strode from the cabin back straight, with tension. The marshal moved to the window, keeping watch, while giving Eleanor what privacy he could as her labor progressed. The contractions were coming faster now, stronger. Eleanor bit her lip to keep from crying out, knowing that each sound would only increase Mason's worry when he returned. Through the haze of pain, she found herself thinking of her mother. Had she felt this same fear, this same determination when giving birth to Eleanor? Had she known somehow the path her husband would take, the danger that would one day threaten their child? Another contraction gripped her, this one so powerful it forced a scream from her throat. The marshal turned alarm on his weathered face. Ma'am, should I call for help? Eleanor shook her head, gasping. Not yet. It's not time. But she knew it was close. The pressure building within her was unmistakable. The child was coming, ready or not. Outside, a commotion arose, raised voices, the sound of a struggle. The marshal moved to the door, hand on his revolver. Then Mason was there, his face a storm of emotions. Behind him, supported between two deputies, came Abraham Winters. Eleanor's father looked smaller than she remembered, diminished somehow. His shoulder was bandaged, blood seeping through the white cloth. Eleanor, Abraham said, his voice breaking on her name. Daughter. What is he doing here? Eleanor demanded, glaring at Mason. Joshua's dead, Mason said flatly. Shot himself rather than face arrest. Before he died, he told us things. About the society. About your father. Abraham stepped forward, his legs unsteady. Eleanor, please, I need to tell you the truth. Before it's too late. Another contraction seized her, cutting off any response she might have made. When it passed, leaving her panting, Abraham had moved closer, his face anguished. I never wanted to hurt you, he said, tears tracking down his weathered cheeks. Never, you must believe that. You carved a symbol into my flesh, Eleanor gasped. You used me to create a child you intended to sacrifice. Abraham flinched. No, that's not. I never meant. He looked helplessly at Mason. Tell her what Joshua confessed. Mason's expression was grim. Joshua admitted to manipulating your father for years. He used Abraham's grief over your mother's death, twisted his faith into something dark. The ritual, the prophecy, it was all Joshua's creation. I believed him, Abraham whispered. My own brother. He said he'd had visions that God had chosen our family for a great purpose. I was lost after your mother died, searching for meaning. And Joshua, he gave me one. Eleanor wanted to reject his words, to hold on to her anger. It was safer than forgiveness, cleaner than the complicated truth he offered. But as another contraction gripped her, as the child within her pressed toward life, she found she no longer had the strength for hatred. The texts, she managed when the pain subsided. Mason said you misinterpreted them. Abraham nodded miserably. Joshua brought me the translations. I never saw the originals, never questioned. His voice broke. He admitted it all, before he died. How he changed the words, invented the ritual. All to control me, to control the society. Why? Eleanor demanded. Why would he do such a thing? Power, Mason answered, when Abraham seemed unable to speak. And land. The society has been buying up water rights across 3 territories. Joshua was positioning himself to control the entire region once the drought drove others out. The revelation struck Eleanor like a physical blow. All the pain, all the suffering, not for faith or prophecy or divine purpose, but for mundane human greed. I'm so sorry, Abraham whispered, reaching tentatively for her hand. My precious daughter, can you ever forgive me? Before Eleanor could answer, the most powerful contraction yet seized her. A scream tore from her throat, her body arching with the force of it. The baby's coming now, she gasped. Mason! Mason was at her side instantly, his strong hands supporting her. Everyone out, he ordered. Except you, he added to Abraham. She's your daughter. Stay if she wants you to. Eleanor met her father's questioning gaze, and after a moment's hesitation, nodded. Whatever his sins, whatever pain lay between them, Abraham Winters was still her father. Still the man who had once sung her to sleep, who had taught her to read, who had loved her before madness claimed him. The marshal and deputies withdrew, leaving the 3 of them alone in the cabin. Outside, the day had fully dawned, sunlight streaming through the windows. What followed was a blur of pain and effort for Eleanor. Mason's steady hands guided her, his voice a calm anchor in the storm of labor. And to her surprise, her father proved a comfort as well. Holding her hand, wiping her brow, murmuring encouragements as she struggled to bring her child into the world. I can see the head, Mason announced after what seemed like hours. One more push, Eleanor. Just one more. Gathering her remaining strength, Eleanor bore down, a primal cry escaping her as the child slipped from her body into Mason's waiting hands. For a terrible moment, silence filled the cabin. Then a thin wail rose, the cry of a newborn taking its first breath. A girl, Mason said, his voice thick with emotion. A perfect little girl. He laid the tiny, squirming infant on Eleanor's chest. She stared down at her daughter in wonder, the red, wrinkled face, the shock of dark hair, the impossibly small fingers that curled and uncurled against her skin. She's beautiful, Abraham whispered, tears streaming freely down his face. Perfect. Eleanor touched her daughter's cheek, marveling at the softness, the miracle of new life. Yes, she agreed. Perfect. As Mason tended to Eleanor and the newborn, a strange sound arose outside, a soft pattering against the cabin roof, growing steadily louder. Rain. Abraham moved to the window, his expression one of awe. It's raining, he said, his voice hushed. A real downpour. Eleanor looked down at her daughter, then up at her father. Not because of any ritual or prophecy, she said firmly. Just nature, just life. Abraham nodded slowly. Yes, just life. He returned to her side, gazing down at his grandchild. What will you name her? Eleanor considered the tiny face, the new life entrusted to her care. A child born in storm and violence, yet untouched by the darkness that had threatened her. Faith, she decided. Her name is Faith. It was right, she thought. Not faith in rituals or prophecies, but in the deeper truths Mason had spoken of: love, courage, the unyielding hope for a better future. Abraham's eyes filled with fresh tears. Faith, he repeated softly. Yes, that's perfect. Mason finished his ministrations, covering Eleanor and the baby with a clean blanket. I'll tell the others it's safe to come in, he said, moving toward the door. But before he could reach it, a commotion arose outside, shouts, the sound of running feet. The door burst open, and Marshal Hollister appeared, his expression grave. Reed, we've got trouble. Mason tensed. What kind of trouble? Society members from Cedar City, a whole group of them armed to the teeth. They must have been on their way to join Joshua. Eleanor clutched Faith closer, fear constricting her heart. Would it never end? Would there always be another threat, another danger? Mason's face hardened. How many? 20, maybe more. They're demanding we release the prisoners, threatening to burn the place down if we don't. Abraham straightened, a new determination in his bearing. Let me talk to them, he said. They'll listen to me. I'm still the prophet to them. Mason and the marshal exchanged glances. It could work, Mason admitted reluctantly. If anyone can calm them down, it's Abraham. The marshal nodded. Worth a try. Better than more bloodshed. Abraham moved to Eleanor's side, looking down at her and Faith with a mixture of love and regret. I'll make this right, he promised. Whatever it takes. Eleanor caught his hand. Be careful, Father. A small, sad smile touched Abraham's lips. I will. He bent to kiss Faith's forehead, then straightened and followed the marshal outside. Mason moved to the window, watching tensely as Abraham walked out to meet the new arrivals. Eleanor could see only a portion of the yard from her position on the bed, but she could hear her father's voice, clear and authoritative, as it had been in the old days before madness claimed him. Brothers and sisters, Abraham called, lay down your weapons. The time of conflict is past. Murmurs arose from the assembled society members, confusion and uncertainty in their voices. The prophecy was false, Abraham continued. A lie created by my brother Joshua for his own gain. I was blind, deceived by grief and the desire for meaning. I led you astray, and for that I am deeply sorry. Blasphemy, someone shouted. The prophet would never deny the sacred texts. I am not a prophet. Abraham replied, his voice breaking. I am just a man, a flawed, broken man who has done terrible harm in the name of faith. He raised his hands, palms open in supplication. The rain has come not because of ritual or sacrifice, but because that is the way of nature. The drought ends, the rains return. No blood is needed. No child must suffer. Silence fell, broken only by the steady patter of rain. Eleanor could imagine the confusion on the faces of the faithful, the struggle as they tried to reconcile this Abraham with the prophet they had followed. Go home, Abraham urged them. Return to your families, your lives. Build something based on love, not fear. On truth, not prophecy. For a long, tense moment, The outcome hung in the balance. Then gradually the sound of weapons being lowered, of horses being turned. "They're leaving," Mason reported, relief evident in his voice. "Most of them, anyway." The marshal appeared in the doorway, rain dripping from his hat. "Crisis averted for now. Your father's quite the speaker, Miss Winters." "He was a preacher before everything," Eleanor said softly, looking down at Faith's sleeping face. "A good one." Abraham returned to the cabin, soaked to the skin, but with a peace in his expression Eleanor hadn't seen in years. "It's done," he said simply. "They've agreed to disband, to go home." Mason clasped his shoulder. "Thank you." Abraham shook his head. "Don't thank me. This was my mess to clean up." He moved to Eleanor's side, gazing down at his sleeping granddaughter. "I have so much to atone for. A lifetime won't be enough." "But it's a start," Eleanor said, reaching for his hand. A tentative smile touched Abraham's lips. "Yes, a start." The rain continued through the day and into the night, a gentle, steady downpour that soaked the parched earth. By evening, small streams had formed in the yard, water flowing where dust had rained for months. Inside the cabin, a strange makeshift family gathered around Eleanor and Faith. Mason had cleared the main room, allowing the doctor from Escalante to examine mother and child when he finally arrived. "Both doing remarkably well," the doctor pronounced. "The little one's small but strong. Good lungs on her, that's for certain." Faith had demonstrated those lungs several times, her cries bringing a smile to even the marshal's weathered face. Now she slept peacefully in Eleanor's arms, tiny fingers curled around her grandfather's weathered thumb. Abraham hadn't left Eleanor's side since the confrontation with the society members. His eyes rarely left Faith's face, as if memorizing every detail of the granddaughter he had once seen only as a means to an end. "What happens now?" Eleanor asked as darkness fell and the cabin grew quiet, the marshal and his men withdrawing to give the family privacy. Mason looked up from the fire he was tending. "That depends on what you want, Eleanor." "I want—" She hesitated, looking down at Faith. "I want my daughter to grow up safe, free from fear and prophecy, and the weight of others' expectations." "She will," Mason promised. "Joshua's dead. The society is disbanding. Your father—" He glanced at Abraham, who sat with bowed head. "Your father is here. I'll stand trial for what I've done," Abraham said quietly. "Face whatever punishment the law demands." Eleanor's heart ached at the thought. "And if I don't want that? If I want my daughter to know her grandfather?" Abraham looked up, hope and disbelief mingling in his eyes. "After everything I did to you—" "You were ill," Eleanor said simply, "lost in grief and manipulated by Joshua. That doesn't excuse what happened, but it helps me understand it." She shifted Faith in her arms. "Besides, she'll need all the family she can get in this world." Tears welled in Abraham's eyes. "I don't deserve such forgiveness." "Perhaps not, but it's mine to give all the same." Mason cleared his throat, emotion evident in his voice. Marshal Hollister mentioned something similar. Said that given the circumstances, Joshua's manipulation, the evidence of coercion, he might be willing to recommend leniency, especially if you were to help dismantle what remains of the society Abraham. Hope bloomed on Abraham's worn face. "I would do anything, anything at all." Eleanor looked to Mason. "And you, what do you want?" A complex array of emotions crossed Mason's features. "I've spent years hunting the society, seeking justice for what they've done. Now," he sighed, "now I find the lines between victim and perpetrator aren't as clear as I once thought." And your son? Eleanor asked gently. Joshua mentioned him before he died. Pain flashed in Mason's eyes. A final cruelty. There was no truth to it. Just one more manipulation. He shook his head. Samuel is gone. I've accepted that, finally. Eleanor's heart ached for him, for the loss that had shaped so much of his life. I'm sorry. Mason managed a small smile. Don't be. If not for that loss, I might never have tracked the society, might never have been here when you needed help. He nodded toward Faith. Some good has come of it in the end. The simple truth of his words settled over Eleanor like a blanket. Good from evil, hope from despair, life from the ashes of what had been destroyed. Perhaps that was the real meaning of the ancient texts, not blood sacrifice, but the transformation of suffering into something new and beautiful. Stay with us, she said impulsively, here on the ranch. Faith will need a grandfather, yes, but she'll need others too. People who can teach her strength and kindness, and how to stand against darkness. Mason's expression softened. Are you sure that's what you want? Eleanor looked from him to her father, then down at the sleeping infant in her arms. A family cobbled together from broken pieces, from shared pain, and the tentative hope of healing. Yes, she said firmly. This is exactly what I want. Outside, the rain continued to fall gentle and cleansing. Inside, in the warm glow of the fire, 3 generations sat together: the past, with its burden of mistakes, the present, with its fragile peace, and the future sleeping peacefully unburdened by prophecy or expectation. Faith, Eleanor thought. The perfect name for this child, born amid storm and violence, yet carrying within her the promise of something better, something healed. Look, Mason said suddenly, moving to the window. It's stopping. Eleanor joined him, Faith cradled carefully in her arms. The rain had indeed slackened, the clouds parting to reveal a sky ablaze with stars. And there, arching across the heavens, a rainbow shimmered in the moonlight, a rare night rainbow, its colors muted but unmistakable. A sign, Abraham whispered, standing behind them. Not of prophecy or divine retribution, but of promise, of hope. Eleanor leaned against Mason's solid strength, her father's hand resting lightly on her shoulder. Together, they watched the rainbow fade, the stars emerge in full brilliance. It doesn't hurt anymore, Eleanor said softly, the words meant for herself as much as for the men beside her. Inside, I mean, not like before. Mason's arm came around her shoulders, careful not to disturb Faith. Good, he said simply. That's good. And it was. Not perfect, not unmarked by the scars of what had come before, but good. A beginning, not an ending. Outside, the desert drank in the rain, preparing for the bloom that would follow. Inside, a family formed from unlikely pieces did the same, absorbing the moment of peace, readying themselves for whatever growth might come next. Faith stirred in Eleanor's arms, tiny face turning toward the window, as if sensing the beauty beyond. Eleanor touched her daughter's cheek, marveling at the perfection, the untouched innocence. Welcome to the world, she whispered. It's better than I thought. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Eleanor Winters believed her own words, believed in the possibility of healing, of forgiveness, of a future unmarred by the shadows of the past, believed at last in the promise of rain after drought, of light after darkness, of life stubborn and beautiful, pushing through the cracks of what had been broken.